Welcome to Ageless by Rescu. This podcast is devoted to exploring the science of rejuvenation, uncovering the most trusted experts, the must-have products, innovations, and technology in the field of vitality, aesthetics, new beauty, and cosmetic enhancement. Jim, I'm so delighted to have you on the show. It's absolutely an honor and pleasure, particularly as AI is so hot right now, particularly in the field of predictive medicine and wellness.
I'm excited to be here as well, Bahar. And when I saw your invite come in, I thought this is a fantastic opportunity. So I'm feeling great.
Well, you are a pioneer in this field. You're a tech head, so you're not a doctor, but you've worked adjacent to the wellness and medical industry to develop technology that supports the industry. And now, with the introduction of AI merging quite seamlessly into the sector, there are so many applications. And that's what I'm here to explore today, because the audience that's listening to this episode, they're normal people. And they want to know how this will impact their wellness journey and how it will impact their parents who may be, being diagnosed or suffering from ill health, how it will impact their children. So I would love through that lens for you to share, to give us your crystal ball vision of where are we and where are we going with AI and wellness.
Yeah. So what's interesting is there's so many things that have come together in the last 10 years with a number of different fields. So when you say AI, it's not just some plug-in tool. It's literally affecting a bunch of disparate categories. So in the past 10 years, you've had the rise of molecular testing platforms. You've also had what are called CRISPRs, which is the ability to begin editing genes, things like
I'd
that.
love you just to explain that, because that to me is the most exciting aspect of medicine and truly revolutionary. And it's getting better and better, right?
Yeah, so if you think about it, our master plan is our genetic code, right? And we each are super unique, even though there's 8 billion of us on the planet right now, and there's infinite variation. So within that, let's say 98% is good, and there are a couple things that maybe we all have our kryptonite, just to borrow the Superman analogy, where maybe through the course of life for most people, it never kind of surfaces, but maybe there's this combination of unique environment or diet or anything like that, where all of a sudden it exploit that weakness. And so what if you could edit that? Maybe it's the same as if it was a house, you'd replace a board and not
Absolutely.
have the whole house fall down because the board rotted. So that's kind of the simple analogy on that. So imagine being able to edit your master architecture.
And we can, right?
Well, you're starting to have that in limited ways. Just with Jennifer Doudna won the Nobel Prize for her CRISPR work. And you have a number of companies in the last 10 years that have formed on that. But literally the next decade is going to be the golden age for figuring out these discoveries and then making them mass scale so that they become cheaply available. So a lot of that has required a lot of computational value and power to be able to figure all this out, because just the complex interrelationship between all these different variables is really far beyond the human comprehension and capability of doing it. It would just take forever.
So the
So
role
with
of
us,
AI is to take this mass of information from multiple data points and then do the analysis in a way and in a speed and in multiple variations that human could,
yeah, you
computation.
literally think about it. You have this incredibly fast clock speed that allows you to all of a sudden compute all these different variations and potentialities. And it would just take us forever to do that. But they can do a massive amount of pattern matching and recognition. In fact, quietly, one of the very first big AI victories last decade was this ability to begin mapping out all the proteins in the body.
And
Because
I
a
understand
protein,
that this is now being made available publicly for everyone. That's one of the wonderful things about the health and wellness community and the medical community, is that some of this research is then made available. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's starting to become available. It's still very limited, but where the CRISPR stuff we're not quite doing, but they're kind of like a really friendly next door neighbor, right? So for us, what we're doing is about. So I had a diagnostic company 10 years ago, and it became fairly well known. It was Wellness FX, and for 3 years I had it was in the valley, and so we were all part of this quantified self kind of guerrilla movement, and we got going. And for a while, I was getting tested once a month with the full blood diagnostic platform, about 250 biomarkers. So I really got to see how my biology worked, and I would take a test and I'd say, all right, if I took this supplement, I wonder what it would do. And by the time I was done 36 months later, I knew my recipe for life. And then I sold the company. And for whatever reason, I never tested myself again until about a year and a half ago. I said, all right, I wonder what's up. So I went over and got an extensive same panel. And I discovered all my markers were in the green. And I'm in my 60s. So generally, you start to fall apart a little bit. And I went, wow, that really had some staying power. So I did kind of crack my own code. But then
Wow,
I
that's
was going to
so
do
interesting.
this company, this molecular testing company. I could explain why it's so transformationally different than traditional blood diagnostics. And so I had the test run. So I had a little bit of the worry in the back of my mind of, okay, what hidden landmines are they going to discover with this deeper dive into your molecules, right? And so I got my results back, and we test 26 biological categories right now. And we
So
do
this
it
is with
there.
the work you're doing with molecular,
Yeah, that
your new company.
yeah, our test assay runs 250 biomarkers, but instead of doing, say, a single biomarker for like here's your glucose, it will take families of these markers and analyze the complex mathematical relationships between them to say output you have a 98% risk for Alzheimer's or only a 2% risk, or all these things can be quantified now. So I was kind of apprehensive, wondering, all right, yeah, I had kind of old style by blood diagnostics, and I probably one of the most tested humans in the world at the time. But what's going on?
I love this. You're
So I did
kind
my
of like a NASA astronaut. Like they know everything about you. They know what happens when you take, a drop of glucose. They know what happens when, there's too much MSG in your Chinese food. Like, wow.
yeah. So I get the results back, and first of all, good news. I was because there's a little apprehensive. All 26 were what we call in the green, so that's good. My lowest score, because given it's multiple biomarkers, we also want to make it really approachable for the average person. So we do it on a 0 to 100 score, because we all grow up being graded 0 to 100, right?
True, true.
And we instantly know what that score means. So in dietary health, I got a 78, and that was my lowest score, and that was in the green.
And
And I
I
had
can
a bunch of
imagine you're a super achiever. So 78 did not sit well with you.
I was you totally nailed me. I was unhappy. I double clicked and I started looking at, all right, what marker is the offending one within that cluster? But what can I do for it? But then all my other ones went up from there, and my average score across all 26 categories was 92.5. So
Bravo.
phenomenal.
I'm
So
clapping for you.
yeah, but I'm happy because, for myself, yes, but I'm also happy because it means that anybody, if they had the right tools, could do that, right? So that was the key point for me there.
I think what you've touched on is what's really beautiful about where we're headed with this, and for the people who are willing to embrace it and bring it in, is that we're going to go from reactive medicine to proactive medicine. And I've I'm a massive proponent of what I call knowing your own dashboard. So, and I always talk about this. I encourage my listeners to have full blood panels, full gut health checks, DNA testing, any scans that are available, because we spend so much time buffing and puffing the outside and knowing all sorts of crazy things about,
Hmm.
what outfit suits us, what music we like to listen to. And yet we don't know the most fundamental things about how we operate as an organism. And there is a lot of diagnostic testing available. And once you have that blueprint of your operating system, as for lack of a better word, you can make modifications. And those modifications yield amazing dividends quite quickly. So for me, the hormone panel testing revealed so much about myself.
Hmm. Yeah.
My DNA testing was extremely profound in the way that I made some adjustments. I, I was lucky enough to get a great score when I had my DNA test results, but it also showed me what I'm predisposed to in other things, and that made
Yeah.
me
Kind of
curious.
where are those weaknesses, right?
That
Yeah.
made me
Okay.
curious.
Hmm.
And my daughter just turned 13, and I'll be doing a DNA swab of her. I wanted to wait till she was 13. I won't share the results with her, but I think it will help me parent better. It will help me feed her better. It will help me support her well-being and growth better, make better decisions around the house in the way that I'm nourishing her, the way that, her sleep and rest and sport is set up. So I think, that's kind of rudimentary. What you're talking about is that next level up. And are you saying that what you're doing is available to regular people?
S Soon to be. So one of the other things that happened being part of the Silicon Valley kind of quantified self movement in the early part of last decade is that we were going to all these meetups and talking about what we knew, and it was a very small group. And but I also noticed that's when you started getting kind of the, not to talk badly, but the kind of tech bro-ish. I'm so profoundly important to the world. I need to make sure I test it so I can keep myself around for
There's a
everybody.
little bit of stigma around that. I totally agree. And
Just the over testing, and I've always thought, why can't we make that, democratize it and make it just part of everybody's life versus somebody can maybe spend 100 to 200,000 a year. Some guys do up to a couple $1 million a year.
absolutely.
um, and it sucks down excess healthcare and resources, when if you had a more efficient way of doing it, you could do that. So what if you had a testing chip, which, we have 250 markers right now, 26 categories. And then the way the pace of the science is going, our system works. We have this massive machine learning AI system that does knowledge management. It sits on top of all of the major scientific and medical publications and journals, and it vacuums those up. And so right now there's about 1 million credible scientific publications of data every year. And it's beyond human comprehension to vacuum that up and then make sense of it. But our apparatus, our knowledge management does that. And what it does is it looks for markers that are coming out of, say, proteomics research or metabolomics or genomics. And it bubbles up the most creditable markers. We take those and we see if we can replicate them on our testing assay, which we run on a well qualified mass spectrometry device, and we get the output from that. So that part is really well understood, but the costs are coming way down. That used to be tens of thousands of dollars to do, and now within the next year it'll be sub $100. So that's like
Wow, that's
it's
extraordinary.
like,
Can I just interject here?
yeah.
The pushback that I get when I espouse all of
Hmm.
this testing and how much I love knowing this about myself, the pushback that I almost always get is what you know about yourself, big pharma knows about you, or big tech knows about you. And aren't you uncomfortable with that level of information that can then be married up with your other information? And therefore, you have zero privacy, not from a cellular level, much less to a data information level. So, and we've seen the nightmare of, is it Thanos? What was the Elizabeth
Yeah. Elizabeth Holmes.
Holmes?
My
Yeah.
analogy of Elizabeth is that she actually was a contemporary of mine with my company at the same time,
Wow.
and I could actually never figure her out. And I used to I'd go into meetings. They go, "Well, Elizabeth has figured it out, so we're not going to finance you." So it was actually deeply personal to me because I had such a hard time raising money, and it is what forced me to sell my company. Actually,
You're
um,
kidding me.
no,
Oh,
but I knew a lot of people, like the people who had the patents on microfluidics at the time, which is what she was doing. And I'd go talk to her. I said, "So how is it she can do all this stuff? I thought you had these patents." They're like, "There's no way." So I and I don't want to be one of those people who says I knew it all along, but I was always deeply suspicious because it didn't add up, but it did distort the market. and
Well,
whatnot.
it's
So,
distorted the market and it's
mhm,
distorted, any time there's something that people are inherently suspicious or uh, nervous about, and then they get proof that their suspicions
it
were
taints it.
founded. Yeah. So I can
So you
understand
want to
how
know
that,
my analogy of Elizabeth Holmes when I get it? Because right now I'm out raising my next round of capital for this company. And that always comes up because we're literally a small tube of blood um, that is pretty soon going to go to just a disc that you put on your arm because we've gotten the amount we need down to such a little amount. And they'll say, well, that's Elizabeth Holmes. I say, well, think of it as Elizabeth Holmes if she
if it
wasn't committing
worked.
fraud and she had science. But it's kind of like somebody in a business category built on this magnificent hill, a fantastic mansion, and it's haunted. And so we're the first ones to have the courage to go knock on the door and go walk back in the mansion. So this is a perfectly good place. We've exorcised the demons and we're ready to occupy it so everybody else can use it. So
Well, I love
that's kind
this.
of how we see that.
Because I have to say, in watching that trajectory, it was so compelling. Like, as a consumer, I like to call myself a citizen scientist.
Mhm.
My father is
Yeah.
a scientist, but I'm a citizen scientist, and I'm deeply curious about this evolution. And my entire show is founded on the concept of being curious about the cellular, the science of cellular wellness.
Yeah.
So for me, what you're developing is my dream state. Like, I would love nothing more than to be able to purchase this disc for under $100, to know more about my cellular health, and then to be able to make informed, deeply personalized decisions about the supplements I take, the sleep I have, the
Hmm.
diet that I follow, the amount of water that I drink. And so I was really invested in that other business being a success. And it was
And it's disappointing when it doesn't
I was
happen,
about to say
right?
it was
Yeah.
hugely disappointing, and
Hmm.
she was a
So
woman.
So going back to your other question though, there's that. So the opportunity is there, right? It's just the market and the scale and everything had to catch up. But on the area that you bring up, which I call consent management. So I used to work at an insurance company. After I sold my company, I went to work for a big traditional insurance company because I wanted to figure out how traditional healthcare worked, and I learned a lot there. But one of the things I did is I ran a consumer platform for about 2 million consumers, and we were really having to deal with data accounts. And so, my personal philosophy that I brought over from that experience is that your data should belong to you, and you should have a very robust account or personal health record that actually manages your consents because data is a really interesting thing for consumers and healthcare orgs. Some data, if you're an org, if you want to contact them or transfer the data for the consumer, you have to get permission every single time. Some data has like every 6 months, you need permission, but otherwise you could just do back and forth. And some of it's evergreen, meaning once you have the permission, you can do consent management with the consumer around their account. So these companies it's very complex and there's no commercial software available. But what we have set up in our philosophy is that we're on the consumer side. So when you buy your test, even if let's say your employer in the US provides your healthcare, your data belongs to you and they're not allowed to look at it. If you leave and go somewhere else, it's portable. If you ever say, I want it destroyed, we'll destroy it. So that's something we're invested in basically becoming the data repository for all these different accounts because we want people to get tested every year. We think they should because it's the longitudinal data that gets super valuable. So that's kind of our philosophy. As far as the pace of science is on our side. So we're at 250. Our newest assay that's coming up, you can think of it almost like a new microchip with more capacity, is going to have over 800 proteomes and proteins and metabolites on it. And then next year we have another 1,000 that are coming up through discovery. Because when we vacuum up all that literature, the way we decide if it's credible or not, we actually go see if we can put it on our test plate and replicate the result from the independent scientific research. If it passes that test, that's how it makes it on our chip. So
So
that's the
I'm just
testing
going to
platform.
play. as a citizen scientist, I am
Yeah.
like everything that you're saying excites me so much. And what you're saying is so interesting because you're saying right now we've got 850, you said, is that correct?
We have 250, but
250.
within the next 6 months, because
Yeah,
we
so the
validated
numbers that you're
internally.
saying, the
Yeah,
timeframes are so short. So as a mother, I'm thinking, my goodness, by the
compressed.
time my daughter is old enough, the body of information that you'll be able to run the data points along is just fantastical. But again, on the point of data security, I'm being
Hmm.
devil's advocate because it is still such a big I guess, mountain for technology companies and biotech in particular to climb over. In Australia, our largest health fund had a data breach, and this happened last year. So we had two major data breaches in Australia last year. One was our second biggest telco, and the second one was our number one private health insurer. And the people who stole the data as part of their, strategies to ransom,
Hmm.
they published highly sensitive materials on the internet. They published records of women who'd had terminations, and that, as you can imagine, just like the emotional
Hugely
revolt,
invasive.
hugely
Yes.
invasive and problematic because you expect Australia's largest insurer and private insurer to or largest telco, second largest telco to have a methodology to protect our data. And similar to what you say, just as your technology is fast moving, so is hacking technology. So
Hmm.
again, I want to come back to this point. Once you democratize the technology, which is what your company is really running toward, which is wonderful. Um, do you think that we have to have a slightly more relaxed view of our biodata security so that we get the benefit of being able to get the data? Is that part of what we have to kind of let go of? And
Well, I grew up reading science fiction, so I always and I for some dark reason I always liked the dystopian novels. So so I always try to, even though I'm naturally optimistic, I also always have a dystopian hat I put on and try to figure out, all right, what could go wrong? And so, first of all, uh, anybody, no matter how good their intentions or their capabilities or how much resource they put into something, any org can have a data breach. And so that's just a fact of life. But making sure you take all the steps you can to make sure that doesn't happen is the best you can do.
And
Right
do you think that
now,
that's going to be like the biggest part of your marketing pitch? Because I think what you've developed as a scientific um, innovation, everyone wants. Like, I mean,
yeah.
there'd be many people who you'd be hard pressed not to want to know that and
Well,
help yourself.
and it's going to be your cornerstone data because there's this thing called this movement. It's a huge market. It's called real world data that is coming out. And so if you have cornerstone data, that's data that when it comes in, it almost becomes like the strategic crossroad that activates, in this case, all the other data sets. So let's say that you have been going to a neurology clinic for years and you have your claims for your insurance. You also have maybe your doctor notes observing you. And then maybe you've had imaging to, check neurological progress. And then all of a sudden, you have dropped in there our proteome metabolome test that actually shows, all the other data you have is what's been observed or other means, whereas this shows what's actually been happening over time at the molecular level, right? And then you start cross correlating all of those data points, you're going to get this really robust model. And so we're very open source too. So if you have other data scattered around, siloed data is not useful. If you can bring it all together, you get a much better picture. So we're not arrogant enough to believe that our data set's the only one. There's going to be a lot of other useful data sets that if they're orphans, they're not going to be as useful, but when paired up with ours, supremely useful. So then you get back to the security question, right? Is boy, I just consolidated all my data. So it's great because it's consolidated, but it's bad because it's consolidated, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to sort that out. And there's a couple things that we're working on that the company's actually worked on for a while. There's a really good, I'd say, uh, crypto blockchain research group at UBC in British Columbia that's been working on this for years. So we actually have we're going to base our consumer account, probably, I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but that everybody would have a blockchain account. And, it gets a
Ah,
lot of bad news, right? But the great thing that I like about a decentralized ledger like that is that it actually helps you manage your permissions. And we just got done mentioning consent management about data, healthcare data, and that's the biggest blocker, and that causes the most breach. So if you have an individual account controlled by somebody that seamlessly controls the consents as an individual, that at least ups the security a lot more. So I think there's a couple creative technical solutions you can take. And then you just have to have a culture of what is your brand as a company. And so for me, the brand is that we have to always be on the side of the consumer. We always individually represent the individual and not the organization. And even if, let's say, a company comes to us and says, "Hey, I have 1,000 employees. I want to give them your product as an individual benefit, because if they all get tested, we can look at the overall model and help make better decisions about what benefits to give the group, but not peek at the individuals." So even if we got paid for it, we're always going to have in our consent documents that the data belongs to the individual, and you can't talk directly to, say, the employee. So if
yes.
you want to direct resources to them, you have to go through us or some other trusted group like a doctor. So
Um,
there's you got to do both the technical and the structural.
so I saw recently, I think it was as recently as last week, that Viome in another round of
Hmm.
raising, and they were able to raise, I think it was 85 million US. I think it's a
Yeah.
third round. So, and they just do gut microbiome testing. It's a test that I actually offer on our virtual clinic
Hmm.
alongside pathology tests and DNA tests. And so I'm imagining for the field that you're in, whilst there were some setbacks from previous entrepreneurs entering the field, it is a robust area of investment because predictive health must be an enormous cost saving to said health insurance companies. And
Yeah.
when you look at countries like America, where healthcare is so expensive, um, surely there's an upside for insurance companies and providers of healthcare to invest in this precursor technology, which helps prevent.
Yeah. Can I give you a stat? I lead off some of my investor prezos with.
Yes.
There's this fantastic study, and I boiled it down. Is that in the next 12 months, 3% of our population will develop significant illness, unbeknownst to us right now, and make up 25% of our total national health expenditures. So if you're talking about a $4.4 trillion healthcare economy in the US, that's $1.1 trillion is going to be caused, is going to be the
Sucked
cost
out.
is going to happen from 3% of the people. And we don't know who they are just yet, but we will in the next 12 months. So, what if you could move upstream and go from being symptomatic to pre-symptomatic? Because let's face it, when you see a symptom or when you don't feel well or something like that, by the time you're able to notice something on most conditions, it means that you've let it go on for longer than it should have. And if you caught it before, so you want to hear our biggest win from last year with one of our customers?
Totally. And in fact, I was going to ask you, can you personalize it away from big data to some real human stories? Because I think that's when technology becomes really interesting, because
Right.
when you can try it on as a human.
Yeah. So I love the humanity of just uh, personal journeys through healthcare. They're so interesting. So our big win last year is we have a longtime subscriber. She's been super diligent about getting her test every year and follows all of the, because we provide recommendations when you get your results back because it's such complex data. It wouldn't be fair
Oh
to
my
be
goodness, that's
yeah.
wonderful, and that
Here's
was
what your
actually one of my
biology
other
means.
question. Yeah.
So she's been good about that, and her markers look great. So on her most recent test last year, she came back and her signature was completely off. And when we ran it, she had a high predictive risk for pancreatic cancer. And so we're not doctors, so we enabled her to go talk to her doctor, who was good and immediately ordered imaging and came back because we said, this is a signature for pancreatic cancer. We're pretty sure. Came back, she had three small lesions on her pancreas, barely noticeable.
And
And so
impossible to have detected otherwise, right?
well, and that's a mass cancer. It's a death sentence. Usually, if you hear you have pancreatic cancer, it's followed by and go home and figure out how to enjoy the last 3 months of your life. So at stage one, you could go in and excise the three little lesions with laparoscopic and no chemo or radiation or anything like that. And so she had that done earlier this year. And we just had her rerun her test to see if her markers had receded back to normal values like before. And it came back completely clean. Every single protein and metabolite had returned to where they were before.
Jim,
And
can I
so if you
ask you a
think about,
question with
yeah,
regards to that particular case study?
mhm.
Does your platform send the alert to your client, to your patient? Is it, or is it that I would be reading my report and say, "Oh, that looks off," or is it that you've collected my data points, and if something looks awry, I'll get an email or an alert?
So there's two things that we all deal with as healthcare consumers. You're thinking, okay, I'm tackling all my health and wellness things, and oh look, I got more in the green here, and I'm able to lift more weights because I'm stronger, or this and that. And then life happens, right? There's always that one landmine or something that periodically hits us, and that's serious illness. And so, in the case of the woman I was just talking about, she had been doing everything right, and she just happened to have a cancer develop, and we detected it at the molecular level. So, on the health and wellness stuff, she works with her health and wellness coach that we tee up that's trained in our system and all that. But then when something clinical comes up like that, then we have to surface that to her and say, you need to go talk to your primary care doctor. Because we also want to enable a really productive conversation
But
with highly
that's my
trained
question.
professionals.
How is this
Yeah.
communicated? Is this communicated as an alert or is it a one-on-one conversation? How are you
It's a
managing?
one-on-one. I don't like to like on a case of a cancer, sending, hey, by the way, your latest report shows that you have uh, a high predictive risk for pancreatic cancer. So on clinical, it has to be more of a one-on-one consultation.
And so again, going back to my initial question, if
Mhm.
I'm having the monthly testing with you on your platform or yearly testing, whatever the
Yeah.
protocol is, and something is detected that is outside of the wellness range and goes into disease detection,
Yeah. It's kind of all right. We need to talk to a clinician.
right?
Uh,
So who picks that up? Your team picks that up in the data
yeah. So when
points.
the because it's complex multiple markers, and
Exactly.
every condition, there's 8,000 conditions known to man, right? So each one has a unique signature. So you need to be able to say, all right, here's the signature. And then you have the
Let's
conversation with
explore.
the consumer. And by the way, you should go talk to a clinician because we're not doctors, right?
Perfect. So I just wanted to understand the process.
And no, it's super important because you have this duality. It's kind of
Yeah,
like uh, using the house analysis again, analogy again. I take care of the house. I make sure it always gets painted, tended to, and all that. But occasionally, some severe damage happens, and I have to go get a professional. Uh, we enable you to do both activities. You tend to your health and wellness activities, and anything serious comes up, we make sure you're set up to have the best possible conversation with a qualified physician that you can. Now we're small enough that we haven't had the instance where somebody says, "I don't have a doctor," because then you think of all the outcomes on that. It's like, okay, do we help them find a doctor or, this and that? But that would be the next phase of our development.
So going back to the, I guess, the application of this
Hmm.
technology and where we're going with AI. When you were talking before about your dystopian taste in books when you were a teen, I was thinking like when I was little, the Jetsons were like one of my favorite,
Well, that's very
cartoons.
utopian.
Exactly. That's what I was about to say. So, but it's funny, so many of the things that were characterized as fantasy in that show in my lifetime and have come to pass as the absolute norm, like the absolute norm.
Yeah.
So, in a way, I am quite optimistic because I think if we can imagine it, we can create it. And I guess that's what your company has done. You've imagined a world where this concept is a reality and it's useful and it's democratized, and then you've gone backwards because you are tech people. You've gone, okay, well, if that's the goal, if that's the moonshot, how do we get there? So that's super exciting and comforting to know. But what I'm interested in now, knowing what you've developed and what you're on the brink of providing potentially to anyone who can afford it and can get to it, is what will come next. I mean, if you had your crystal ball or that you were writing a Jetsons episode, what would be your nirvana in terms of the application of AI in medicine?
Well, I think continuing our current model of bubbling up when credible research discoveries happen of new markers, making sure that we're not remiss and in finding those and making sure our system surfaces these are the best new batch to then go put in and see if we can replicate it and then add it to our assay and our array. And then the second thing is the output of all of that data is what we call the risk signature. And we're getting to an era of holistic approach to medicine. So I'll give an analogy of another client of ours who she has been a stabilized diabetic for years, has done a good job, but has recently in the last year been her situation has accelerated and it's been unfortunately deteriorating. So with diabetes, if you become advanced on that, you can almost bet there's a number of comorbidities coming up, whether it's COPD or PVD or CVD,
What are they?
arterial
Sorry.
disease, peripheral vascular disease,
Yes.
cardiovascular disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, kidney disease. So there's probably a dozen different things that arise off of a out of control diabetic. But right now, the system just says you're a diabetic,
Yes.
right? So the reason why, and this is a long answer, is why a multi-marker model and mapping out how each one's interacting with each other. You could say that this woman is advancing in her diabetes, and here are her emerging comorbidities. So we should actually make sure we're treating both so that
Wow.
permanent damage doesn't occur versus just saying, oh, her diabetes is getting under control. I wonder what's coming up with her. So I think you can get way ahead of the game. And the multi marker part of life is different than the single marker approach that medicine's had in the 20th century. And so, just to talk about why it's such a different system, our regulatory path, we're probably going to get approved as a de novo class 2 medical device for predicting risk, the data output, because it's novel. But then we got to figure out how do we get reimbursed for it um, in the healthcare system,
That's
right?
what I was going to ask you. Surely
So
the
they pay
insurance.
for diagnostic markers now, but they pay very little money for screening.
Right.
So all the incentives are to develop things that detect manifestation of illness versus moving upstream to kind of molecular formation of illness, which in some cases could be 5 or 10 years in advance of that. So you got to think about how does the system change. For example, maybe my aspiration is that everybody says, all right, twice a year, I just get my test done and it's fast and it's easy. and it tells me that I'm tracking on my health and wellness goals, and it picks up any dreaded early formation of disease to nip it right in the bud before it happens. And the system's set up for that. And then just continuing along my dystopian frame of mind on that one, I think, well, what could go wrong with that? Well, what if you did that and the system paid for all the like, here's your twice yearly is free because it makes sense, but you discover early serious disease and you're part of a class of people who doesn't have good healthcare coverage. That could be pretty frustrating because you, like, let's say you're in a
You know
system
it's
that rations,
coming.
yeah, and they ration care. Like they said, well, you can't see a specialist for 2 years.
And the other thing
Um,
that has happened
yeah,
in Australia with DNA testing and pre-screening is that your health insurer says you have a predisposition to this
uh-huh,
disease. Therefore, we're not going to insure you.
yeah, yeah. So I think you have to have, again, that's why the data and the control of the consumer output in an account has to be with an entity whose loyalty and trust is with the consumer.
But if you have to do an honest and full disclosure, and say, for example, I had my pre-screening and it showed very high likelihood of uh, genetic predisposition to say bowel
Hmm.
cancer. Um,
Yeah.
I have an obligation. If I have that test and I have that result, there's a legal obligation for me to disclose that to my insurer at the time of insurance, whether it's life insurance or health insurance. And if they can prove that I had a DNA test or I had diagnostics that flagged this before it manifested and I took out health insurance, they have the right to deny my insurance. So
So
there's,
that's another, you've done a good job of adding to my dystopian list, right?
but it's happening. It's real.
I do have an answer for that actually. So do you know why I like proteins and metabolites more than I do genes? So genes are a possibility. And so some estimates say that 15% of what happens to you in life is based on your genes,
Yes.
and 35% is access to healthcare, and then 50% is individual decisions and circumstance,
Epigenetics.
right?
Yeah.
So that means that the pre-existing genes are possibility, they're not fate.
I love
Whereas
that. And I
so
love that you've highlighted this.
protein expression is function. They're the players. That's what's going on right now. And then the metabolome is the readout from all your cell functions. So those two together are what's going on. But if you're doing it early, like the pancreatic cancer example, then she had bad markers there, right? They were going in the wrong direction, but it was so early you could address it. And as soon as it was addressed, the markers went back to a baseline level. So if I were talking to the insurance company and countering their argument, so okay, well, so what you're saying is you just want to make sure that somebody is at a good level of their markers. And if they get out of whack temporarily, we discover it early and deal with it. And if it regresses, then everybody's good, right? So that's
Oh, I
how,
think I'm
yeah.
on your side, but what I'm saying is that that responsibility and I guess that mountain climb will be in your hands because,
Hmm.
you're the developers, you're the visionary, and then we have to get everyone else to come up under us. And through these conversations, through the case studies where every single person's life matters. And I love that you were able to like pinpoint this one woman's life because that
Yeah.
one woman's life is a great story. And I'm sure there's many, many, many examples that you have,
I
but
would love to. So if you ask me what I want the company to look like in 10 years, I would love to have 100 million people trusted me with an account. They get tested twice a year. And we have these incredibly rich long run profiles because they all become risk patterns that we can then say more quickly, hey, this risk pattern matches this one over here. And then we begin comparing treatments and all that. And we have this flywheel getting more and more efficient about detection and saying, here's what a really subtle, complex risk profile looks like. Here's what works with this one. All those things. So we're all a wealth of data. And so we have a common good that we should be doing if we had safe mechanisms. that our pattern, add it together, say, 10 are great, 1,000 better, a million, fantastic, 100 million, tremendous. So all that is, I think, how you change how healthcare is. And that sounds kind of optimistic and big, but addressing like scale, can you make it progressively cheaper? Can you save the system money and prove that it's valuable? All those things are elements you have to address to kind of, tilt towards more of a predictive preventive future versus one that kind of sits around and fatalistic waits around for the next hammer to drop.
That was like one of the most optimistic conversations I've had about cellular wellness in a long time. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, Jim. I love being able to bring visionaries such as yourself who are about to, completely change the landscape of how we view uh, our our wellness and the possibilities for optimizing not just longevity but also our health span. And I think that the health span conversation is actually the most interesting part of the conversation when it comes to optimizing your health, because who wants to be old and sick? You only want to live longer if you're functioning well and you can enjoy your life. And um, I'm so excited and fascinated. And I would love to, I would love for us to have this conversation in a year's time and to see what molecular you has been able to achieve in this fast moving space. So watch this space. I would really, really love the opportunity of having you back in a year's time and see how far you've come.
First of all, I'd love to come back, and it was delightful to talk with you, but also by extension with your audience. So thank you. It's a privilege.
Thank you so much. And thanks for staying up late to chat to me here in Australia. I appreciate it.
No worries at all. Have a great day.